real guiding forces of the festival, who really made a lot of things happen, was Bob Fox. That he worked with the Ohio Arts Council. How many people worked with Bob? He was just really phenomenal, and he made things happen, and he just helped the festival grow and evolve. And if I needed help, he assisted me. And Kate Fox is here, and I just want to recognize Bob. He was a wonderful spirit. In that vein, I also want to mention Mickey McKay, who was a great person too. Okay, Maggie. First of all, Maggie has long participated in the festival, going back to 1988 and appearing again in 99 and 2000. She has published numerous volumes, including Great Hondal, Greatest Hits, Years That Answered, and her most recent, Dear All. In addition to her, and which is for sale in the back, Maggie has been an important force in poetry in Ohio, having taught at Kent State University, editing the Wick Poetry Chapbook series, and directing the Wick Poetry program. This, her latest volume, covers a wide range of styles, from that of Whitman in the title poem, Dear All, with its long lines, direct address to the reader, and conversational rhythm, to the Billy Collins-like Waiting for Jane Austen in Walnut Creek, Ohio, at the end of the 20th century. Those of you who are familiar with Billy Collins, Emily Dickinson poem. On a personal note, Jane Austen helped me get my PhD and has been very good to me. Therefore, I was pleased that Maggie did right by her. And then also another style is in her poem, The Blessing, Maggie's, which evokes James Wright. And to quote from that, and I think you can hear Wright's influence, I come for the silence of amber, the flicker of the brook trout over the rapids, to the soft banks of sand, where the stiff-necked sumac bend and fall down to what's left at the end of the river's dry branch. I am pleased to welcome for the fourth time Maggie Anderson.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, friends. James Wright's people, my people on the Ohio River. I'm going to read a river poem to begin. Tom mentioned that one poem of mine had some influence from James Wright. Probably a number of others do as well. He is, along with Muriel Rukeyser, an essential poet for me. This poem is called Empirical. Everything sad that ever happened to me I have mourned beside a river. This afternoon I sat by the bridge pilings and studied the slow drawl of the Willamette as it choked on the rocks and spit its current back through the branches of cottonwoods. Flood is easy for a river, like giving up. What's hard is carving a valley, pulling toward the sea on its hands and knees. In my room, there are 12 panes of glass, and beyond them, a furnace of pink azaleas pulling in the dark. It has been blue dusk for some time now, and I have been watching shadows alter these flowers to banked coals. I lie down to wait for the river. What I love about sorrow is its capacity for metaphor. How sadness makes things resemble each other. To the river, my body is just a stone. I give it what I have, first one, then the other of my empty hands. It lifts and carries me a few feet past blossoms of skunk cabbage, beautiful, like sheaths of sun. I float for a while, seeing clouds the way I saw them as a child. My long hair trails behind me like a windsock, seining twigs and fish. At the bottom is the vegetal mud, and it's not like anything, but it's mine. Like burning embers, the azaleas suck up the dark earth they fall to. I cloud the brown silk of the river, and I take it in. This is an Ohio poem written shortly after I moved to Ohio from Oregon. I know this part of the country. I worked for 8 to 10 years as a poet in the schools in West Virginia and Ohio and Pennsylvania. And I lived for a period of time in Moundsville, right down the river here, and taught once in a middle school in Martins Ferry. So this is called Beyond Even This. I was having a hard time adjusting to Ohio, I need to tell you, but by now I love it, of course. Who would have thought the afterlife would look so much like Ohio? A small town place, thickly settled among deciduous trees. I lived for what seemed a very short time. Several things did not work out. Casually, almost, I became another one of the departed, but I had never imagined the tunnel of hot wind that pulls the newly dead into the dry Midwest and plants us like corn. I'm not alone, but I am restless. There's sorrow in these geese flying over, trying to find a place to land in the miles and miles of parking lots that once were soft wetlands. They seem as puzzled as I am about where to be. Often they glide in what I guess is a consultation with each other, getting their bearings, as I do when I stare out my window and count up what I see. It's not much, really. 1 buckeye tree, 3 white frame houses, 1 evergreen, 5 piles of yellow leaves. This is not enough for any heaven I had dreamed, but I am taking the long view. There must be a backcountry of the beyond, beyond even this and farther out, past the dark smoky city on the shore of Lake Erie, through the landlocked passages to the great Sweetwater seas. Thank you. Okay. Let's see here. Oops. Throwing my things around here. This is called A Few Small Gestures of Concern. I don't think I need to say anything. A few small gestures of concern. Just north of Hartville, Ohio, where I drove today, thick woods opened out to fields and cattle pastured down to the lake. My mind was full of lists of meetings, picking up medication and dry cleaning, when suddenly, for no reason, I was remembering the time Lynn bought my lunch, when I had money enough to pay for my own, but because she didn't know what to say to my grief, she said, "I want to buy your lunch," and it was expensive and good, and I was grateful, which made me think of Sandra, whom I haven't seen in years, walking beside the Willamette in Portland in the cold sleet of a November night. Nothing happened. We walked 2 city blocks, talking pleasantly about nothing in particular, and then she asked me if I wanted to borrow her gloves. One afternoon, 30 years ago or more, in my makeshift office in the Cathedral of Learning, with no furniture but a view of the Heinz Chapel spire, dark with rain and city grime, Ed stuck his head in the door and said, "It's a little alienating, isn't it?" I wasn't sure if he meant Pittsburgh or teaching, the view, or life in general, but they all were. And who would have thought I would remember this so clearly for all these years? In December 1971, I was visiting Jane Bennett in California, Pennsylvania, where I called my father from a wooden phone booth in a drugstore. He was 3 days away from his death, alone in his apartment, aphasic from the strokes. I told him, "I love you," and he said, "You're right." Those were his last words to me. Sometimes when the years come close like this, everything that happened once seems to have been happening forever. Someone is putting cold cloths on my head because it hurts. Someone is sitting on the edge of my bed, where I am a fevered child in another world far beyond hearing. Today I was only busy, but when Anna touched my shoulder and told me, "Take a little nap, you're exhausted," I could see I was. So I lay down heavily, like the bales of hay the good farmer of Hartville pitched out for his stock, because the ground is frozen solid, because the weeds are iced with hoarfrost. And like the cattle, I ambled over the cold field to take whatever might be offered now from the flat bed of the mostly reliable wagon. Let's see. Sorry, I lost my place here. One of the things about my family history from West Virginia is that all of my uncles, not my father, who was an academic and a teacher, but my uncles, my father's sister's husbands were all hunters. They all went deer hunting. Probably some of you in here have been deer hunting, or you know people who have been deer hunting. And one of the things that I liked to do when I was young was help my Uncle Ike clean his guns. So this is a poem called Cleaning the Guns. The first part of this is actually true. It really is true. The deer heads were bolted to the wall in my uncle's houses, stuffed and mounted on a plaque. As a child, I was sure the body of the animal must be behind the wall, as if it had just poked its head through a curtain. Every fall, 2 days off from school for the start of deer season, and then dead deer were hung to cool in backyards from heavy ropes, their eyes still open. My uncles were all white men who chewed mail pouch tobacco and spit into coffee cans, and all of them were hunters. I liked to sit on the cement back porch with my Uncle Ike and help him clean his guns. We started with his revolver, then the rifles, and last, his shotgun. It took all afternoon. Ike had a white blanket to put the parts on so they wouldn't get lost, and old undershirts I cut up in little pieces to wrap around the rods. Ike was a machinist on the railroad, and he knew parts. He taught me the names of each one, and it was my job to do the final buff. After we worked a while, he might tell me how he got his deer this year, or another one from some time back, the one whose head now hangs over the TV set. Of course, in a few years he taught me to shoot, and I wasn't bad, but I never went hunting. Too much trouble, I told everyone, and by then I had grown a little scared of him. But really, it was the helplessness I couldn't get around. The deer, absolutely still, alert, one shot, and death. I couldn't do that. But I did like cleaning the guns. All the tiny parts, heavier than they looked, and the requisite precision, the art of it. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. This is called Our Journey. You may hear a little echo of James Wright. This is this journey. Mine is our journey. This begins with an epigraph from Walt Whitman. The palpable is in its place, and the impalpable is in its place. We drove beside the rivers through the blue smoke and the red sun sharp on glass buildings, past the bridges and the windows of the prison, where dark faces pressed to the light like smudged soot of the old city, wisps and leftovers from the mills. You were in your green feathers and your yellow cap, holding my big white dog and jug of water, carrying my coins and keys. I was carrying your 3 valises, the extra tire, the toolbox, and the lug wrench. We drove south past the new malls and the red runoff at the strip job, and we gazed long at the lime green fields where new lambs rolled their heads to get at the swollen teats and nuzzle the warm body of their making. The mountains rose like loaves from the wild rivers, and we followed the Monongahela and the Youghiogheny through the gorges to the slow climb up, gears dragging and shifting to overtake the semis hauling double-wides on their flatbeds. And we came at last to the redbuds, just beginning to fill out their colors, like pursed lips or fresh bruises, beside a yellow of forsythia thrown over the road cuts on the downgrade. We saw then how quickly the wide sky shifts from bright milk of pale sun to ooze of fog, and we felt acceleration in our thighs as the rain came down heavy on the windshields, startling our vision. And we drove to the moon-drenched lake, where we listened for the lap of the deep water, its riffle in the dark, its pinch and sheen, and we slept until first light, when the geese began their flat, wet cries, their glides sousing the air with wings. We walked the path we've known all our lives, wearing our soft clothes and wooden bracelets. So near it was we could name every weed, coltsfoot and trillium, lavender verbena and nests of kingfishers in the cottonwood branches lowered to the water the beavers dammed up over the winter. You were with me, my most welcome companion, my ambitious bird, my left hand, the one who led the damaged children to safety in a straight line across the side roads and wet ditches. You have always been with me, in the houses of smoke and oily cinders, in back alleys and harbors, you in your purple coat, I with my red scarf, in our hard exile and sweet demands. Oh, thank you. You're such a nice audience. I'm going to take you back to North Carolina. Okay. Well, this one has a direct reference to our friend James Wright, so I nod at the beginning here. There's still some of these poetry circuits around. There was an Ohio poetry circuit many years ago, and there's still one called the Georgia Poetry Circuit, which I was on a few years ago. And they put me up in a place called the Sidney Lanier Best Western Motel in Gainesville, Georgia. I wonder, do any of you know who Sidney Lanier is? Oh, good, good. Outside of this region, nobody knows who he is. But he was a wonderful writer and a musician, best known for his long poem, The Marshes of Glynn. And he lived at the latter part of the 19th century. Lake Lanier in central Georgia is named for him, as is the Sidney Lanier Bridge in Brunswick, Georgia, and at least one Best Western motel. In the Sidney Lanier Best Western Motel in Gainesville, Georgia, I think of the great Polish poet Wisława Szymborska, who wrote that she believes in the wasted years of work. I read this on the airplane yesterday. What did she mean by waste? What did she mean by work? This town is the poultry capital of the world. Was it in Georgia or North Carolina where all the workers died in a chicken factory fire because the owners had locked the doors from the outside against the union organizers? Last night at dinner we wondered, how long does it take to write a poem, on the average? Considering I have written some poems in 20 minutes and some poems I've been writing for 20 years, I guess the average would be about 2 to 5 years, and of course the rest of my life, which is half a century plus a few years. But we'd have to subtract the time required for raising children and for the long distractions of grief, a year or two for grandparents, and for parents, maybe 6 to 8 years, depending on how many you had to begin with, and that's not counting friends, ex-lovers, or beloved pets, and at least 5 years for partners. And for the loss of a child, the years are uncountable, years with no heart and no thought. And if one allows for the toll anyone's job can take in time, human tiredness, real or imagined reprisals, the slow, dull days without thinking one single original thought, well, then one poem could take a lifetime. And much of any lifetime is waste, isn't it? For example, I could be doing any number of things this morning besides writing here, but since the great expatriate Henry James wrote, "A writer is one on whom nothing is wasted," I'm sitting in a mauve and green room in Georgia, in a motel named for a poet, writing down what I'm thinking at the moment. I'm letting this place have its way with me, as James Wright did, lying in his hammock, trying to find language for what appeared to him, the bronze butterfly, the distances of the afternoon. And at the end of his poem, he famously wrote, "I have wasted my life." I prefer Szymborska. Whatever wasted years are, she believes in them. But they are taking us somewhere we need to go, like the winning football team, the Poets, in another state where the Southern poet Andrew Hudgens graduated from Sidney Lanier High School. Can anyone call to mind a line or two from Sidney Lanier? And if not, were all his years of work wasted? We do not like to say so. And this is not where I wanted my poem to end up. On the main street of Gainesville, Georgia, is a bronze chicken. Today, I will read some of my poems to the students of Brunel University. This is my work, and I believe in it. The waste, the distances of the mornings, the ice bucket, and the armoire with the TV set inside. Well, let's see here. I had a plan, but I've lost it, so we'll have to just go along with things. I don't think anybody ever writes just one poem. Do you? You don't. And many of us write poems over and over again on the same material. And some of the same material for me was the early deaths of my parents. I was orphaned and without family by the time I was 25 years old. My mother died when I was 8, and my father when I was 20. I have no siblings. When I turned 50, which was the age my mother died, I felt some kind of strange something, like I was going into some territory I didn't know how to go. So this poem is called At 50. My mother died at 50 of a beautiful word, leukemia. 9 years earlier in autumn, she gave birth to me, when the maples in the park began to turn, as they do now. I don't know how to walk here. In the shifting space, no meanings fill. I have now outlived her. I enter this foreshortened field, wildly unmothered still. Thanks. Let's see. There's no clock in here, so I don't know how I'm doing. How am I doing? Good.
Another 5 minutes.
Okay, I can do it. We can get that. How about if I read you 2 more poems? Does that sound good? It's warm in here. It's sleepy afternoon. This is the title poem of the book. It's called Dear All, and it's funny, most of the books that I've written the first poem in the book and the last poem in the book after the whole middle was written. I don't know if that happens to other people, but I didn't have a beginning and I didn't have an end, I just had a middle. And then I was very happy to be able to find a beginning poem and an ending poem, which I will end with. Dear all, you, whose memory comes to me winter afternoons as the soon-gone sun falls low and thin. You, whom I knew long and well. You I knew but slightly, knew not well but cared to, had there been place enough and time. You who have come to hate me now. You who are the trees out the window to me, the shallow-rooted I have always loved. I greet you in my unsent letters, in both my random and my steady thoughts. You whom I failed to thank, and you I failed to turn to. You I have tried and tried to speak with and have not been able to cross those seas. You I fought with in the snow in unsatisfactory shoes, marching up and down, shouting at each other. So hot we were, so cold, the drifts deepening. You I let down, and you I picked up by the highway. You who have made a name for yourself. You who were called back and never came back. You who would not leave. You I worked with as we had never worked before, side by side in the studio, with 5 windows glazed by yellow light. You I no longer know, but fear dead. Drugs, car wrecks, the several wars, the usual deaths of my generation. And you who have gone the distance, beyond your disappointments, your cancers and their dire cures, my friends, I send you this letter from the landscape of our years together. You must not wonder if I think of you still. I have remained steadfast here. I have remembered you wholly into this day. The last poem I'll read is a tribute, in some ways, to my other essential poet, Muriel Rukeyser. The title is a line from one of her poems. And then I arrive at the powerful green hill. Up, up, I follow the creek bed, through downed branches, on spongy leaves, rimed and slippery. The way is clear because it is late winter, wet snow patches, the runoff cold, cold to the touch, a tang of ice still in it. And then I arrive at the powerful green hill, my place, my exact location, where I began and started from, where I will end beneath this ground. I have brought everything I've left undone, letters and resolutions, almost loves, hard grudges, to give to the wind that takes them up, tosses them down, down until my hands are empty and I am as thin and light as a girl. Thank you very much.